Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Gather round, bookworms, because the time has come for a new episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll read part 2 of chapter 12 of No Regrets by Ace Frehley from Kiss. If you missed part 1, I recommend going back to it so you won't be confused. Now, let's see how part 2 plays out. I left the exhibit with a feeling of extraordinary well-being and peace. I drove to the set, apologized to the director and producer for my short fuse and absence, and promised that I would behave better in the future. They accepted my apology, and everything seemed to be okay. I didn't learn until much later, when I saw the movie for the first time, that filming had gone on without me that day, including a scene in which our characters waged an epic battle with Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman in the park's Chamber of Horrors. My character was a big part of that, and in the opening scenes, I am present, but once the action starts to pick up, someone else takes over. Under the best of circumstances, the whole thing would have looked silly, but on top of that, the director had enlisted the services of my stunt double to finish the remaining shots in the scene. Usually a stunt double is used only in distant shots or quick cutaways, but in this case, my double was a black man, a terrific guy, hell of a stunt double too, but he didn't look anything like me facially, and even with all the makeup on, it was painfully obvious. I mean, you can see it clearly if you watch the movie. During the fight scene in the Chamber of Horrors with Frankenstein, he gets knocked around and thrown into a pillar with a couple of skeletons tied to it. Just hit the pause button. Hey man, that's not Ace, that's a black dude. Very funny stuff, and let's face it, would you expect anything less from the producers who made the Scooby-Doo cartoons? The funniest day of shooting, though, was probably the one when we did the scene at the pool, in which we are confronted by the park manager and head of security about Gene knocking around a few security guards the night before. In the beginning, the park manager rapidly walks into the scene and toward us from the other side of the pool. Well, on the first or second take, he tripped on one of the rocks and took a bad tumble and fell flat on his face and hands. For every take after that, I was completely overtaken by the mental image of him stumbling. I must have ruined at least 25 takes with my laughter. On the first few takes, the other guys joined in, but after that, I was pretty much alone. It was very embarrassing for the other actor and me, but I absolutely lost all control of myself. The incident reminds me of when I was little and routinely got busted for cracking up in school or in church. That was the funniest part of the movie, but the most fun was at night while we were shooting at Magic Mountain. I bought a motorbike while we were out there. The park was closed to the public after dark, so I had free rein on the smooth asphalt roads throughout the facility. Between takes, I'd jump on the bike with a nice buzz and ride around the whole park without a care in the world. Remember, back in the Bronx when I was little, we didn't have motorbikes, so it was really my first chance to enjoy myself without having to worry about any other traffic. It put a smile on my face, for sure, but I nearly broke my neck a few times. Typical for me, though, just being Ace. Oh well, those were just some of the many things that happened, or went wrong, on Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. None of it meant all that much to me. The whole thing was a goof. If you take it in that light, it's okay. Almost like a Saturday morning show or a Japanese sci-fi flick. Come on, who doesn't like Mothra and Rodan? From day one, I thought it was going to be campy and silly. Gene, unfortunately, took the whole process very seriously and was infatuated with making movies. I also believe it was the spark that got him thinking he could become a movie star. In fact, he did a few more films afterward too, mistakenly thinking he could act. Kiss Meets the Phantom was a huge embarrassment for him, I think. For me, I had a few laughs and made some new friends and had a very interesting experience off the set. I didn't really take it seriously from the outset and didn't think much about it once it was over. To be honest, I thought it was a natural step in the devolution of Kiss. We got exactly what we deserved and exactly what most people expected. By the time the movie came out, it was apparent that we all were getting complacent and wanted to do other things. Our two previous albums, Alive 2 and Double Platinum, were basically compilations, bringing to 9 the total number of Kiss albums. All 9 were released in the span of 4 years. I remember at the end of the shoot, sitting around a table with the other guys in the band, with Bill Aucoin and some of our business advisors and accountants, and talking about how we were going to fill the next 6 months. Bill suggested that instead of making another Kiss record, each of us should consider a solo project. I thought it was a great idea. We could all pursue our musical interests, take a turn in the spotlight, and give fans a virtual buffet table of choices from the guys in Kiss. Creatively and commercially, it seemed to make a lot of sense, and it had the additional benefit of giving us a break from each other. We had spent so much time with each other over the previous 5 years that it was inevitable for tensions to arise. I felt good about my solo project from the beginning, mainly because I knew I'd be teaming up with Eddie Kramer. I had a lot of confidence in Eddie. I respected him, and he respected me. We had been a good team on Kiss albums, and there was no reason to think we wouldn't work well together on a solo venture. Apparently, though, no one else shared my confidence. I still remember Gene and Paul saying to me, in front of at least a dozen people, "Hey Ace, if you need some help on your record, don't hesitate to call." It wasn't said with malice, but neither was it said with sincerity. There was a tone of condescension to it, like, "You're gonna need help." Remember, Paul and Gene dominated every Kiss album. They wrote and sang most of the songs. They were the dominant personalities. I'm sure they figured my album would fail, or that maybe I wouldn't even get it done. If you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, you could say they were trying to look generous in front of our management team by offering their assistance if I needed it. You know, because I was crazy Ace, unreliable Ace, the spaceman. Regardless, I remember walking out of that meeting and thinking, I'm gonna show these. And I'm gonna show the world. For the first time in a long time, I felt motivated. When somebody says to me, "You can't do that," it makes me want to do it all the more. Even as a teenager, when my parents would say that I was the black sheep, I found it inspirational in a weird sort of way. Yeah, I had a drinking problem. I lacked some confidence, but I knew I had the chops. After all, I was the lead guitarist in one of the biggest rock groups in the world. I knew I had the ability to make a great solo record. It was just a matter of staying focused and teaming up with the right producer. Admittedly, focus has never been a strong suit of mine. Only later on in life was I diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. I don't work well under the pressure of a deadline, and I find it almost impossible to force myself to be creative. Gene once told me, "Ace, I write a song every day." I don't get that. How can you force yourself to write? Writing has to be a creative process, and if you're not feeling creative, it just won't work well. Sometimes I won't write a song for weeks. Then on a given weekend, I might write 2 or 3 songs. When the juices are flowing, you have to be ready. When they aren't flowing, you do something else. Hop on a motorcycle, go fishing, have a party, or maybe build a remote control helicopter. Whatever. Fill the time and divert your attention until you feel inspired. I never write by formula either. Sometimes I start a song with a guitar riff, sometimes with a vocal hook or a melody. It varies. Ideas come from anywhere and everywhere. My personal life, books or magazines, movies, and sometimes even dreams. A good idea is a good idea, regardless of the source. In the case of my first solo album, I was lucky to have a few songs already in the vaults, tunes that had been rejected on earlier Kiss records. That gave me a head start. I brought them back, did a little rewriting and tweaking, and that helped erase some of the anxiety about going off on my own. Other songs just kind of happened. Spontaneous combustion, I guess. It helped too that I cleaned up a little bit, although not completely, during the making of the record, usually limiting my alcohol and use to the evenings after a long day of recording. I also felt I didn't really have much of a choice. I knew that I couldn't blame anyone else if my solo album failed. If a Kiss record sucked, I could always chalk it up to Paul or Gene's megalomania. Not now. This time it was all on me. Whatever praise or blame would be heaped on the record, I'd have to take responsibility. The first thing I did, after getting Eddie Kramer on board of course, was go out and find a great drummer, since Peter was tied up making his own record. An old friend of mine named Larry Russell, we went to high school together and jammed a little back in the day, came up with this name, Anton Fig. I had never heard of Anton, and wasn't sure if he was right for the project, until I asked Eddie Kramer if he had any suggestions. You know, he said, there's this guy I worked with recently named Anton Fig. He's unbelievable. You should check him out. Anton was playing in a band at the time with his two closest friends, Keith and Amanda Linton. Born in South Africa, he moved to the States in the early 70s and settled down in Boston, where he studied at the New England Conservatory of Music. He later moved to New York City. When I heard his name from two unrelated sources, I figured it was destiny that we meet. So I invited Anton up to a studio in the North Bronx that was run by my friend Eddie Solan, and we jammed for a while. We hit it off right away, both musically and personally. I immediately hired him for the job, and we've enjoyed a lasting friendship in and out of the studio since 1978. He recently performed on my latest solo effort, Anomaly, which was released in September 2009. Anton has had one of the best steady gigs in show business for the last 25 years as the drummer for David Letterman's house band featuring Paul Schaefer. He's also one of the busiest session drummers in New York City and has worked with everyone from Mick Jagger, Bob Dylan and Joe Cocker to Miles Davis, Richie Havens, and Paul Butterfield. When I first started writing songs for Anomaly, one of the compositions was Genghis Khan. Listen to the thundering drum work on that song, and you'll understand what makes Anton so special. He holds the pocket back, playing a little behind the beat, just like John Bonham of Led Zeppelin would do. If you listen closely to any Zeppelin tune, you'll find that what gives it that groove is Bonham's drumming. He's never racing ahead of the guitar, he's always holding back. Same with Anton. It's a unique talent, playing slightly behind the beat. It doesn't come naturally for most rock drummers, but when executed properly, it sets up a great pocket and can really make a song swing. Anton is one of the most versatile drummers I've ever met. I bring out the best in him, and he brings out the best in me. We have a musical bond. I don't have to say much when we're in the studio. Usually just a few words about tempo and feel, and some suggestions about where I might want to fill. He just gets it, plain and simple. When I wrote Genghis Khan, I immediately thought, man, Anton is going to nail this song. I played it with two other drummers prior to Anton since he was tied up recording, and it just seemed okay. But when Anton got a hold of it, he really took the song to the next level, just as I had envisioned it. Ace Frehley was recorded at the sprawling Colgate Mansion, on the Philston Estate in Sharon, Connecticut, right by Lime Rock Park Speedway. Once elegant, the 100-acre estate had been vacant for a few years and had begun to fall on hard times. The grounds were a bit unkept. Chips of paint and plaster sometimes fell from the ceiling, but parts of it were still very much intact and impressive. I thought to myself, if only these walls could talk. The library, for example, in which we recorded a lot of the acoustic guitar work, had beautifully carved woodwork and turn-of-the-century textured wallpaper, still intact. It was enormous and grand. I found it to be an inspirational and creative workplace. We used several other rooms to create different acoustic effects. On Fractured Mirror, for instance, we placed microphones at the top of a stairway on the second floor to get a huge reverberating drum sound. We did a lot of stuff like that. Eddie liked working with me because I didn't put many restraints on him and encouraged him to experiment with unorthodox recording techniques. With Kiss, Paul and Gene usually wanted things done by the book. I didn't even have a book. I was more interested in having fun and taking chances. I'd say, Eddie, don't be afraid to try some crazy stuff, and let's try something you've never done before. Go for it. I'll never forget the first time Eddie flipped the tape over on a 24-track 2-inch tape machine. I was a little bewildered. What are you doing? I asked. Don't worry, just play your ass off. That ended up being my first backward guitar solo, and it sounded amazing. I asked, where did you learn that? And Eddie went on to tell me what it was like working with Jimi Hendrix at Electric Lady Studios. Eddie always had interesting stories to tell. Sometimes he'd talk about when he worked with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, or the Kinks at Olympic Sound Studios in London. Once he talked about what it was like recording Led Zeppelin II, including working with Jimmy Page at the mixing board at the record plant in New York, and I was on the edge of my seat. Eddie also worked with Dionne Warwick, Peter Frampton, Carly Simon, and David Bowie. In my wildest dreams, I never thought I'd be working with a producer who would work with so many people that I love and admire. I felt really privileged at that point, and I always wanted to give Eddie my very best performance when he hit the record button. Sometimes we'd put 4 different amps in 4 different places and blend them all together in the mix. Crazy! Always pushing the envelope. Sometimes even double-tracking drum fills, like the drum solos in Rip It Out. On Fractured Mirror, Eddie and I achieved a unique metallic bell sound on the guitar. I was playing a Gibson double-neck guitar into a Marshall stack with the volume turned all the way up. I mean, this thing was ready to explode. On one neck, I had the pickups on, so if I were to hit the strings on that neck, it would have been loud as hell. But instead, I played the picking figure on the other neck with the pickups off. The sound coming out of the amp was the body resonating through the pickups from the other neck. That's how I got those bell overtones. It's a technique I still use today, and you can hear it on an instrumental I recorded and produced for Anomaly titled Fractured Quantum. I was also one of the first guitar players in history to use a synthesizer guitar on record. I used it in the song Ozone, which was lots of fun. And Eddie and my assistant engineer, Rob Freeman, did a great job transferring that sound to tape. The device was called ARP Avatar and was elementary in design compared to the synthesizers available on the market today. Of the songs I wrote for the first solo album, Fractured Mirror turned out to be one of my most unique and enduring favorites. So much that since then, I've recorded 3 more instrumentals in the Fractured series, ending with Fractured Quantum. What's next? I don't know. The most popular song off that record would probably be New York Groove, a song I didn't even write, and frankly, didn't think that much of the first time I heard it. The credit goes to Eddie's assistant, who suggested the song. Originally recorded by a band called the Hello People, New York Groove was written by Russ Ballard. Russ had a band called Argent in the 70s, and I was lucky enough to see them perform in concert as a teen. Eddie pushed hard to include New York Groove on the record. I've always been the kind of guy who will give anything a shot, especially if I respect the person I'm working with. So, I agreed. The signature sound of New York Groove is that aka crunch at the beginning. It almost sounds as if it's being created on a guitar using a wah-wah pedal. But it's not. It actually was produced by using a device similar to the talk box used by Joe Walsh and Jeff Beck, and most famously, Peter Frampton on Frampton Comes Alive. It works like this. A speaker or driver is enclosed in a metal box, into which a tube is inserted. Then a guitar is plugged into an amp, but the speaker output is routed through the box, and the signal is routed back from the box into the amp again. The other end of the tube goes into the musician's mouth, allowing him to sing or talk in a manner that sounds as though the words are being produced by the guitar in a weirdly robotic way. Done well and sparingly, it's an awesome effect. I couldn't master the technique well enough to play the part on my own, so I had my friend Bobby help out. Try to picture this. Bobby sitting there next to me, opening and closing his mouth around the tube while I played guitar. Arca, arca, arca. It was pretty funny, but it worked. As did another of Eddie's ideas. He suggested we add loud rhythmic clapping to the song, figuring it would sound better when the song was performed live. To get that effect, we brought in a big hollow wooden box, and then 3 or 4 of us stomped on it together as hard as we could, and Eddie recorded the whole thing. It seemed kinda silly at the time, but actually it was brilliant and innovative. They don't do like that anymore. Somebody now would just go out and get a stomp box, or more likely, they'd grab a digital sample. In those days, everything you heard was real. We created all the effects. Today, you just press a button or click a mouse. It takes a lot of the fun out of the process, really. I'm all for technology, but I do think it has a tendency to stunt the imagination. After recording the basic tracks in Connecticut, we moved down to Radio City Music Hall. There used to be a recording studio on the top floor. It was wonderful, and I'll tell you why. Because the Rockettes used to come up and visit all the time. They would rehearse, take a break, look in, see what was going on. Then they'd go 1 or 2 flights up and be sunning themselves on the roof. It was a wonderful, accommodating situation, to say the least. Ace Frehley was released on September 18, 1978. As a matter of fact, all 4 Kiss solo albums were released on that day, a marketing stunt orchestrated by Neil Bogart in an attempt to maximize publicity and sales. I'm still not sure it was the greatest idea in the world. Maybe it would have made more sense to roll the records out slowly over a period of several months to give each its time in the spotlight. Instead, Casablanca pressed 500,000 copies of each record and flooded the marketplace on a single day. The results were mixed, to say the least. Critically speaking, Ace Frehley was the most successful of the 4 records. I expected that. My goal was to make a really solid, guitar-based rock album, and I did. The shock to just about everyone was that Ace Frehley was also the most successful of the solo albums from a commercial standpoint, outselling the other 3 albums and producing a top 20 single in New York Groove. I was stunned and moved by the response, and especially by the enduring popularity of New York Groove. It's a great song for a guy from the Bronx, which is what I still am after all these years. It was a total departure from both Kiss and my personal style and taste, but it was absolutely the right song at the right time. On every level, it works, and I give all the credit to Eddie Kramer. He made it happen, and he's just as responsible as I am for New York Groove becoming a hit. I'm proud of that whole album. It confirmed what I had always felt, that my musical instincts were strong. For all the success I've had with Kiss, the experience had somehow managed to erode my confidence and self-esteem. The solo project gave me a chance. It gave all of us a chance to stretch out a bit, to challenge myself artistically. I don't mind admitting that I felt a strong competitive streak during the making of Ace Frehley. I guess there's something wrong if you don't feel that. I wanted to make the best record I could make, and I think we did that. I remember hearing all these stories at the time about what the other guys were doing, how they were putting their records together, and what their strategies were. When I heard that Gene was going to have a bunch of guest stars on his record, I couldn't imagine what he was thinking. Helen Reddy? Really, Gene? What the? Even in Kiss, Gene would sometimes make choices that were so wrong. I know that probably sounds like petty jealousy or envy, given that Kiss remains a rock juggernaut even after all these years, but it's really not. There were a few times when I tried to steer the band away from making what I perceived to be terrible decisions. Peter and I were the ones with street sense, with bull detectors, if you will. Paul and Gene had no street sense whatsoever, especially Gene. He had led a very sheltered, straight life, but his take on certain things was incredibly cynical and jaded. Sometimes he'd come up with ideas and I'd say, "What are you, nuts? You can't do that." It was always about making money, advancing and expanding the brand. It was never about art, never about music, never. I was dumbfounded sometimes by the stuff that would come out of Gene's mouth. He didn't know the difference between what was cool and what wasn't cool. I mean, come on. How could you not know that Helen Reddy, nothing personal mind you, in 1978 was a very bad idea? Her presence alone is enough to make any Kiss fan say, "You, Gene, I'm not buying that pizza." The people you choose to work with on a solo album says a lot about you, but I don't think Gene realized it. Or maybe he just didn't care. Half the time, I didn't know what was going through Gene's mind, but I could always see dollar signs reflected in his eyes. Well, that's the end of part 2. Let me know what you thought of part 2 in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.